First of all, thanks so much for joining us tonight for our Leaders in Conservation event on protecting large landscapes. My name is Tiffany Trinidad, if we haven't met. I'm a development officer at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and I will be moderating tonight's event as well as moderating the Q&A discussion afterwards. So in a moment, I'll actually pass it over to Jill and Kristen, who are our NCC team members, who will take us through some of the important work that we're doing in terms of large-scale conservation and sharing some exclusive details about some of the exciting projects that we're working on. But first, I would actually like to start with a land acknowledgement. So we at the Nature Conservancy of Canada respectfully acknowledge that the work that we do across the country is on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. The area of focus for tonight's event is the Hastings Wildlife Junction. So that's within the traditional territory of the Mississauga, the Anishinaabe, the Huron, and the Huron-Wendat people. For millennia, Indigenous peoples have worked to protect these landscapes and the life that these areas sustain. We honor and thank the stewards of this special place and recognize the continued presence of Indigenous people here today. And second of all, I'd actually like to thank all of you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's really thanks to your support that NCC is able to do this important conservation work. And in particular, I'd actually like to thank our leaders in conservation. So for those of you who may not be as familiar, our leaders in conservation donors are donors who support critical conservation work through the gift of an annual contribution of $1,000 or more. And these donations really help NCC with a reliable source of funding that allows us to continue our stewardship work, undertake new projects, and develop innovative approaches to conservation. So if you are not part of this group and are interested in learning more, please do reach out. I'll have an email address that you can reach me at in a slide in a couple minutes. I also want to take this opportunity to also thank our volunteers. Our volunteers do a lot of work for us. In particular, I know Doug Vardy is on the call, so I want to thank him for his role in supporting the Leaders in Conservation program as the board representative. And last but certainly not least, I also need to thank Ontario Power Generation. They've been a really important partner for us over the years, and this year they're actually generously supporting our Leaders in Conservation event series. So a big shout out to Ontario Power Generation for their help and their support. So I just have a couple housekeeping notes that I want to go over quickly. I just want to note that this webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording will be emailed to you after the event. And at that time, we encourage you to revisit the recording and share it with anyone who might be interested. So colleagues, friends, family.
Bancroft.
We ask that you keep your mic on mute just while Jill and Kristen are talking. There will be an opportunity for a bit of Q&A and a discussion at the end. As well, live captioning is available. So this is generated through Zoom. So to turn this on, you will see a menu at the bottom of your screen. The option to turn this on will say a live transcript, and the caption should pop up for you. And during the presentation, we actually invite you to type your comments and your questions throughout the presentation in the chat. So I'd like to invite you now actually to try that out. You can tell us where you're from, where you're joining us from, and just say hi to everyone. So for anyone who's interested in turning on the live captioning, this is what the button will look like. It'll appear somewhere at the bottom of your screen. It'll take a second to appear, but that should appear above the presentation. And actually, once that's activated, you have the option of increasing the font size if it's appearing a bit too small for you. So you can do that again by going to the live transcript button, selecting subtitle settings, and you can increase the font size. And last thing I'll mention, if for whatever reason we run out of time and we don't get to your question, or you think of a question after tonight, feel free to reach out to me at Ontario LIC, and we'll make sure that we address all of your questions. All right. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Doug Vardy to say a couple words. Doug?
Hey, thank you, Tiffany. As Tiffany mentioned, I'm a volunteer board member with the Nature Conservancy in Ontario. In conservation, we wear many hats. So although I'm a board member, my wife Sharon here and I were both leaders in conservation and active volunteers. And I'm pleased to report that after efforts of a small team, including Sharon and myself, the East Coulson property now has a properly marked trail system for people to enjoy. So on behalf of the board of Nature Conservancy of Canada, I wanted to thank you, our leaders, for your very generous support. And your donations, in addition to well over 1,000 other leaders in Ontario, allows us to do the amazing conservation work that we do here in Ontario and across the country. Kristen, who's presenting today, and I worked on a project sort of in our area, just in the Aurelia area, and it was the purchase of a 1,400-acre property, which seemed huge. But Kristen's gone on to bigger and better things. So now she's working on really incredibly and very impactful large landscape projects. I presume a lot of you may have heard of this, but we recently completed the purchase of an 19,000-acre tract on Vital Bay and Georgian Bay, and excited to hear sort of about the next big large landscape project that NCC is undertaking, the Hastings project. And so with that, I guess I'll turn it back over to you, Tiffany.
Great, thanks so much, Doug. So at this point, I'll actually pass it right over to Jill and Kristen to take us through some of the work.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. My name's Jill, and you just got the sneak peek of the sneak peek. Doug, thank you to you and Sharon for everything you do to support the Nature Conservancy of Canada. It's so appreciated. I just wanted to start out by saying hi. I know a lot of people on the call, Doug, Ben, the other Doug, Sharon, Stephen, Mila. I haven't had a chance to meet you yet. My daughter's name is Maya, so I liked your little comment there. Kamal, I just wanted to say thanks, and it's just a pleasure to have a chance to say hi to all of you and tell you a little bit about what we've been up to. So what I wanted to do in this call is actually go through a couple things. We can flip the slide. I've got a goal. I want to share some great news, which Doug's just alluded to. I want to give you an update on our emerging large landscape program, tell you about the next project that we're working on. And Kristen's going to come in, who is our director of large landscapes, and talk a little bit more about the project, the conservation values, the species, show you some photos of it, and talk a little bit about why we're focusing there. As Tiffany said, we welcome questions, so please, hi Margaret, please just add them to the chat and we'll answer them as we go. So Tiffany, if we go to the next slide. So yes, as Doug said, it's amazing. The Vital Bay project, next slide, is complete. So for those of you who supported it, heard about it, talked about it with your friends, thank you so much. This is for those of you who may not remember, since you don't spend every day of your life in conservation. I should have mentioned that I'm the manager of major gifts for Ontario region, and I've been at NCC for about 15 years. And I still get super excited whenever we have the opportunity to talk about projects that we're working on or that we're able to accomplish. And Vital Bay was the second largest project Ontario region had ever taken on. We took it on just over a year ago, actually just under a year ago, and it is done. We raised $16 million, and we couldn't have done it without everyone on this phone and other foundations and the government, multiple levels of government. And it's just a testament, I think, to how many people care about conservation, and maybe care even more in light of some of the things that have been happening the last year or two. So I wanted to mention that this project itself is about 18,800 acres. That's the yellow hatched area at the top of the map, if you haven't seen this one before. But as you can see, it's adjacent to a big green area. That's a sort of defunct provincial park, Queen Mum. And it's actually connected, and it's protecting this landscape forever. And when you tie it into Coburn Island and some other projects we've protected in the area, it's just off on the left side of the map. Well, my left. But anyways, it's actually creating a complex of over 250 square kilometers. And this is a staggering size when you look at Southern Ontario. But that's where most of the people are and a lot of the species at risk are. So taking on big projects like this is just a wonderful thing to be involved in. And we just want to say thank you to everyone and share. This is not yet public. So all of you are actually the first people to officially be told that we have closed on Vital Bay, and we just wanted to share that with you and honor the fact that as leaders in conservation, you're one of the reasons that we feel secure to take on larger and larger projects. And taking on larger and larger projects is what we're working on. So what I want to talk about next, thank you. Yes, I think it's beyond incredible. And Vital Bay was our first large landscape project. So I want to talk a little bit about our large landscape program and how we're trying to have an impact at a global scale, which Canada has the opportunity to. Next slide, please. So the large landscape program is specifically because, as we can all see, the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change are just impacting our world so much. And we want to be even more significant part of our goals to reach 20% by 2025 or 30% by 30. And so right across Canada, the Nature Conservancy of Canada has been working on this large landscape program that helps provide impetus and support and help bringing more funding to the table to protect really large landscapes. Yes, Doug, you're actually right. We did have a large role in protecting the Queen Mum, I think, Provincial Park. I think it's 15 or 20 years ago now. I love comments, by the way, so keep them coming. What's really interesting is at that time, we actually transferred it to the province because we didn't necessarily have the staff to take care of it. Things have changed a little bit. Our staffing is pretty high, maybe a little bit in comparison to where the provincial government is, and we actually are taking on more and more of the care of the lands. Going back to large landscapes, like I said, Vital Bay was the first one, but our overarching goal right now in the next 2 years to protect 200,000 hectares across Canada and really step into protecting large landscapes and connecting them up, because that's one of the things that'll have the biggest impact for climate change. And Ontario happens to be leading the effort right across Canada with the first creation of a program director of large landscapes. That's Kristen Ferguson, who many of you know. She's been with NCC, I think 14 years. And she's taken on this role and is just knocking it out of the park, as our next slide will talk about. If you want to change. Before I go to our next big project, I'll also just mention that it's not just about large landscapes that NCC protects. It's about working with communities, Indigenous groups, looking at how to have respectful reconciliation through conservation approach to protecting the lands and using a lot of different tools in our toolbox. One of those tools happens to be carbon markets. So we're looking at running a potentially, I've lost the terminology, a managed forest offset carbon project on some of our large landscapes, because that provides a diversification in our funding and helps support the stewardship of that property and ongoing conservation work. And I just want to mention that while we might be looking at some larger landscapes, we'll still be doing all of our work in the south, protecting the smaller landscapes or in the areas that you're used to hearing, like Rice Lake Plains or Prince Edward County or Norfolk. So we will be doing both, but we are shifting a little bit for our large landscape program. All right, and I'm just about to hand it over to our overarching expert here. We want to talk about the Hastings Wildlife Junction. So Kristen, why don't I hand it over to you? But before, actually, no, I'll go to one more slide. Before I do, I just want to briefly say that we know that some folks from OPG are probably on the call, so thank you to those. But also, this property wouldn't be possible without the fact that there's a very conservation-minded owner who's working collaboratively with us. And he doesn't like it when we do shout outs and say thank you, but I'm going to do a shout out and say thank you anyways. And now I'm going to hand it over to Kristen to talk about the project.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jill. So as Jill said, I'm Kristen Ferguson, the program director for large landscapes in the Ontario region. Been with NCC about 14 years, shifting from role to role, getting to understand all sides of the conservation business. And for sure, these have been some of the most exciting, challenging, wonderful projects I've had the privilege of taking on. So I'm really excited to walk you guys through the Hastings Wildlife Junction today. This is exciting. We haven't talked about it yet. So this is the big sneak peek. So welcome aboard. And Tiffany, I'll get you to flip to the next slide. So just to set the stage a little bit, many of you will be familiar with the natural areas that NCC works in. You can see them on this map. That's the Rice Lake Plains, the Carden-Alvar, the Ottawa Valley, and the Frontenac Arch. The Central Ontario Corridor's natural area is a relatively new one. back when we analyzed the places on the landscape that were under the most threat and had the most significant biodiversity values. NCC did this through our conservation blueprint work about 15 years ago. The Central Ontario Corridors area was identified as having somewhat high threat, somewhat high biodiversity value, but it kind of didn't make that final cut. But things have changed, and particularly COVID changed things. Over the past couple of years, we've seen that mass exodus from the GTA. And a place like this area of Ontario, which covers a large swath almost from sort of Orillia out north of Belleville and Kingston, this is accessible area in the GTA where now people are working remotely, are looking to develop more second homes, and the threat is growing enough that NCC identified that this area needs to be a priority where we're working. And it also happens to overlap with some really neat landscape features and some really neat large landscape opportunities. So next slide. So the area is actually has the heart of, it's at the junction of two corridors, really, the Central Ontario Corridors NA, which is where it got its name. So the purple corridor you can see on this map is the Algonquin to Adirondack corridor. So actually connecting two massive protected areas in Canada and the US, providing this important natural corridor where large animals like moose and bear can wander freely. And in addition, this yellow area on the map is what's known as the land between corridor. For those not familiar, the land between is where that Canadian shield, so the granite from the north, meets the limestone from the south. And it creates this overlap where suddenly you have just a ton of biodiversity, all of your northern species, all of your southern species. And our protected areas system in Ontario acknowledges this importance. You can see these green blobs within the yellow blob, and those are all the protected areas, parks, conservation reserves. This area is special and important. And so when you zero in on the heart of those two corridors and these orange pieces, now you're at the Hastings Wildlife Junction. Next slide. So bear with me while I walk you through this map a little bit. There is a lot going on. So everything in orange on this map is part of one large land holding, and it is owned currently by Land Escapes. Land Escapes is a new low impact recreational venture that has conservation at the forefront of its mission, along with providing access to the outdoors for those quiet, wonderful nature experiences that we've all come to appreciate even more since the pandemic hit. So if you look at both the hatched orange and the solid orange on the map, that is the land holding. It's not contiguous, it's broken up into pieces. And while some of those pieces look small, some of them are hundreds, they are all hundreds or thousands of acres in size. So the total is 66,000 acres. And the solid orange pieces that I'll draw your eye to are the opportunity NCC has to protect. So that would be the Hastings Wildlife Junction project, phase 1 and phase 2. So outlined in yellow is phase 1. This is our immediate opportunity to conserve 5,000 hectares or 12,000 acres to be protected immediately. The solid orange pieces outlined in dark orange, I told you this would be quite the ride to come along with me on. Hopefully you're still with me. Those represent phase 2. We don't have a firm date on when we're going to be acquiring those. We want to leave a lot of time for conversations with Indigenous communities, conversations with local users and community members, input from our donors and volunteers about just making sure that NCC and Land Escapes kind of get the conservation vision right. But overall, in time, 20,000 acres or 8,000 hectares would be protected. And I have to give a shout out to the same person that Jill did, who is the owner and founder of Land Escapes, that is generously donating a large portion of the value of this property, over $10 million in land value, actually. So flipping to another point on the map, those green pieces I talked about. So all the solid green are our provincial parks and conservation reserves. Just to draw your eye to the top right of the map, that's Bon Echo. That's a big provincial park that probably several of us have had the chance to visit. And when you picture the vast nature that's at Bon Echo, if you sort of brought all the small solid orange pieces together of the Hastings Wildlife Junction, they would fit into Bon Echo and they'd actually spill over the edges a little bit. And the hatched green areas are enhanced management areas. This is a type of crown land where the government has acknowledged there are special values here. but at the time, for whatever reason, they weren't made into provincial parks. NCC is actually working with a variety of partners, and we've put in an application to the government to start to assess some of these enhanced management areas to see if they could be given additional protected status, which gives us an opportunity here to more than double the impact of the conservation project at the site. And with the hatched orange areas, we're talking about possible future conservation with land escapes, maybe through a conservation easement or other mechanisms. So lots of exciting things going on this landscape. And for those who maybe don't know the area as well, I should have mentioned at the beginning, we've got Bancroft just at the north part of the map. And if you headed all the way down, you'd be sort of near Belleville. So just to place you kind of in the province. Next slide. So this Bancroft area is becoming more and more important to protect. Just this year, Bancroft was named the #1 place to buy real estate by Money Sense, which just shows that same thing I was talking about, that increasing threat, that sort of exodus of people from the GTA. And it means that development pressures are happening here at this property. Perhaps if there wasn't a chance to conserve them, we could think about what might happen to them. Some of the southern blocks are completely surrounded by agriculture. There are certainly areas being subdivided for cottages, and it's actually an important area for minerals, which I'll mention in a minute as well. And formerly, this property was an industrial forest property. So there certainly is ongoing interest from the forest industry. And sometimes that forestry, while it's important to all of us, is not carried out sustainably. So those are some of the threats that are continuing to impact this area, just making it a critical area to protect. So in that Central Ontario Corridor's natural area, that is where we've done some of our initial analysis. Where are the important pieces at the junction of those corridors where we know there's significant species? And this property comes out as a top priority in that plan, just backing up what we could already feel in our hearts that this was a really important place to consider working. Next slide. And yeah, I mentioned this area is really important for minerals, and I saw my colleague Gary Innanen on the call today, who has been sharing a lot of information with that about us. There's all sorts of weird and wacky things going on with the rocks in this area, like ribbons of marble cutting through the rocks in the northern part of the property, making sort of a more basic pH compared to some of the acidic granite around it. And again, doing that thing that happens in the land between corridor where you then get pockets of almost Carolinian southern species within these northern ecosystems. And there's significant former mining operations that took place in this general area. And really, Bancroft is known as the mineral capital of Canada. It's not a super active place for mines these days, but what I do notice is that the rocks on this property are pretty neat. Sometimes I'm just sitting having lunch by a river and looking at a rock going, that looks like something made by a volcano. So I'm no geology expert. I'm more all about the critters and the trees. But I really hope we do get a chance to show it to you guys someday and check out some of the really cool geological features on the site. Next slide. I'd also like to acknowledge this area is really important for many Indigenous people who traditionally use the land for a variety of purposes, whether that was trapping, ceremony, gathering food, medicines, just connecting to the land. And the previous landowners, there have been several, haven't encouraged or facilitated access for Indigenous people on the property. And so both NCC and Land Escapes are currently actively engaging nearby Indigenous communities to learn and listen and find ways that we can work together. But we recognize that these relationships take time. So our principle is to work at the speed of trust. And NCC's goal is reconciliation through conservation, one step at a time, following our Indigenous conservation engagement framework. And if anyone's interested in learning more about that, it's available on our website, and Tiffany can certainly share a link afterwards. Next slide. Okay, here's the stuff that I'm going to start to get really geeky and excited about, but the biodiversity values on this site are incredible. I had the privilege of getting to do a lot of the field work this summer. I'm like, oh no, sorry, I can't sit in front of my computer. I have to go birding. But it was important for us to know what makes this place such a priority. And so here are a few of the reasons. extensive interior forests. When you analyze the 20,000 acres that are part of this first phase of the Hastings Wildlife Junction property, 98% of the land is in natural cover. It's forests that go on, and rivers, wetlands, lakes, undeveloped lakes in the middle of cottage country, rapids, and birdsong just ringing out through the trees. What I've always loved seeing is the evidence of wide-ranging mammals. And I say evidence because I talk this loudly and excitedly when I'm in the field, so I scare away anything that I might have had a chance to see. But what we know is out there from tracks and from droppings and from trail camera footage that Land Escapes has taken on some of their land is that there's eastern wolf, black bear, moose, pine marten, and elk. So I don't know if a lot of people know about the elk reintroduction program that happened in this area in the early 2000s, but elk were actually brought over from Western Canada and introduced into the Bancroft area. Bit of an experiment. They collared a few of them with radio tracking collars so they could see where they moved to. And what's happened now is a number of elk family units have established all down that corridor of the lands, if you can remember them, the orange ones. There's several families which each have their own name, which I find so exciting. And it's neat when you're out there and you think, oh, that's just a moose track. Not just a moose track. That's a good day when you see a moose track, those sort of two notches side by side. But then you look more closely and you realize it's kind of heart-shaped and it has a little spur on its back heel and you go, oh, that's an elk track. So my goal is to actually see an elk out there one day, but I'll have to be by myself and make a point to be quiet. And then I did get to do some wonderful birding there in June, and I actually was struck silent when I heard a Canada warbler singing. So that's a rare bird. It's on the endangered species list. And to have it there singing in June means that it has found breeding habitat on the property. So that means this property is a haven for species at risk. And I swear I turned from that Canada warbler and put my binoculars out on this wetland. And I said, what is that on that log? That looks like a funny looking kind of rock. And it was actually the big domed shell of a Blanding's turtle. And I could spot its yellow throat. So another threatened species on the endangered species list that this property is providing wonderful habitat to. And he was just sitting there completely unbothered by me, just enjoying his day sunning, and stuff like that just really sticks with you. And it highlights and underscores just why it's so important to protect areas like this. Next slide. So what's happening in Ontario is that only 11% of our lands and waters are currently protected. And Jill talked about these really ambitious goals to get 25% of Canada's lands and waters protected by 2025 and 30% by 2030. So Ontario knows, the Ontario government knows, and all the groups doing conservation in Ontario know there's momentum building, and it's time to move the needle on the percentage of protected and conserved lands here in this province. And the Hastings Wildlife Junction represents a big step forward. So this is a $20 million project, and we're targeting approximately a $5.5 million fundraising goal over the coming 2 years to help us complete those first phases. And that's where we're at, and that's where we're heading. And I'm so glad I got a chance to share it with you all today. Next slide. So I just wanted to take you guys on a bit of a photo tour of the property because I miss our LIC tours, and I really do hope we'll get a chance to see this one, hopefully maybe next spring or summer or fall. But these are some of the things we found when we were walking out on the site. Number one, native plants. This is a haven for native species like the dogbane on the left, and getting to go at all different times of year. I got to see so many different things in flower and butterflies nectaring on the flowers. And I took more pictures than my phone knew what to do with. And on this property, I'm always struck by the wetlands. They make me stop because they're basically pristine. Pretty heavily hit by industrial forestry over the past century. The wetlands aren't of interest for logging, and they're in this matrix of natural habitat, and they're basically pristine. So I would come across a wetland and inevitably startle someone. Was it a family of wood ducks that would then kind of squawk and fly away, or a great blue heron stalking across a wetland? That's what I remember from the one on the bottom right, was the great blue heron that we were trying to spot on the other side. And we could actually watch him picking fish out of the wetland and moving his big legs through the water. And those images certainly have stayed with me. Next slide. And the deer in the top left corner was a pretty special moment. I was out with my coworker Chelsea on this quiet gray morning, and it had been one of those times where we were seeing a lot of evidence of animals, but not seeing them. And I picture this wildlife junction of a bear is going this way, and then a moose crosses this way, and you never really get to see it. But then suddenly we got to see it. We got to see this intact habitat, one of these amazing wetlands supporting this beautiful deer. And he just stood there and stared at us for a moment. And we just stared back, and I felt like we were communing a bit, and I made sure to send him a message that, yeah, we're going to get this place protected for you and all your friends who I know are out there. And I had amazing experiences along the rivers. I have a rule that if I'm doing field work, I have to sit by a river and have lunch in a beautiful spot. And Beaver Creek on the bottom left and the Crow River on the right provided so many beautiful lunch views for me. I once thought I might want to paddle down the Crow River. It runs through many of the parcels that make up part of phase 1, actually. But then I saw all the rapids and the waterfalls, and I thought, yeah, no, this is just good for a lunch spot. And it's really, really good. And you're sitting there and you've got birds swooping from one side of the river to another, and you can just hear the water rushing, and you can't hear anything else. And that's what I always noticed here was the peace and the quiet. You're not that far from civilization, but you might as well be a million miles away. My cell phone service would always completely give out, and I wouldn't be that upset about it. And I spent a lot of time on this property just listening and taking it in and enjoying it. And no matter how much I walked, I couldn't see it all. It is so big, and that stays with me too. Just the vastness of it and the importance to protect things at that scale. Next. And that's it. So I'll pass it back to Tiffany now. Thank you guys so much for coming on a bit of a tour with me tonight.
Great, thanks so much, Kristen and Jill. So I think I'll open up the floor for discussion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can kind of look at each other. I feel like that might be a bit nicer. All right, so I'm just gonna, please feel free to add any questions. I'm just looking through the chat now. And if you have a preference for unmuting yourself, you can also ask your questions verbally as well. So I don't see any questions just yet. Don't be shy, ask your questions. Here we go. So Steve has a question. He says, what is the timeline to complete the overall project?
Great question, Steve. So for phase 1, you can remember it, the 5,000 hectares, 12,000 acres, the orange outlined in the yellow. We are looking to close on that first phase of the project by February 2022. So not that far away at all, actually. And then beyond that, we haven't set timelines for phase 2, so the acquisition of the remaining solid orange parcels or any of the additional phases where we will work with Land Escapes on the additional hatched orange parcels. But we anticipate the project rolling out over the coming 3 to 4 years to have significant conservation applied across the site.
And we have a question from Gordon. Can you comment on some of the key issues when scaling up to large projects?
Absolutely. Do you want me to take that one, Jill? Sure. So I guess some of the first things that come to mind, Gordon, would be the challenges of seeing the site appropriately. I was often working on a 100 or 200 acre project in my past role, or as Doug mentioned, the 1,400 acre property that felt very, very big last year. And even that one, it's tough to do as thorough a job as you want. So what it starts to make us think about is not just adding appropriate staffing, which is key, but also what sort of new technology can we be tapping into to be doing aerial monitoring, remote sensing, that sort of thing, to help technology help us manage these properties well. And I also think volunteers are going to play a key role in it, and property stewards. So if anybody was intrigued by those beautiful river pictures, let us know. I think that's a big part of it. And also, obviously, when you're acquiring more land, the costs go up because we want to put enough into the stewardship endowment fund to manage it well forever. And also there are acquisition costs that scale up, things like land transfer taxes, appraisal fees, legal fees, the cost of land itself. So it's meant in some cases that we've had to start thinking outside of the box about, are there new or different types of donors we need to start thinking about engaging with, who maybe will be interested in these large projects, but were perhaps not as interested in the smaller projects, which are just as important. So really trying to find that balance in everything we've done well and what we hope to continue doing well, and holding ourselves to high standards for things like stewardship and making sure we're resourcing these appropriately.
Yep, and if I can add, I think the other complexity is just partnerships, right? That as you look at doing bigger projects, there's more partners involved, there's more funders involved, there's potentially more in different levels of government involved, engaging with Indigenous communities, which can be from a couple to quite a bit more than a couple. And so I think that just sort of taking your time and really thinking about all the people who should be involved and you should be talking to is part of the growing complexity of these projects, but they're exciting.
Great. There's another question here. Could you outline your plans to support these large areas that NCC is in the process of acquiring?
Yeah, I feel like that might have rolled in just as I was kind of explaining some of those new techniques. You read my mind there, that it is going to be a little bit different to adequately manage them, if that's what you mean by support. If fundraising is what you mean, then it's sort of a similar answer, that we need to start thinking out of the box, getting innovative, leaning on partners, maybe engaging unique partners, maybe working on a more dedicated and robust network of like very local volunteers to help us manage these places correctly. And we feel really lucky to have met so many amazing partners in the area already. So I think there's wonderful opportunities to try and do this together. And I see Margaret's asked a question about corporate partners, and that's a great question too, Margaret. Jill, do you have any thoughts on any of our corporate partners?
Sure. So I mean, I think corporate partnerships are, always interesting. Of course, we do some due diligence on any corporations who come to approach us. But I think the point there is, one, large projects of this scale and larger do tend to get a little bit more attention. And then if you look at the last year, you look at the floods and the wildfires and what's been happening around the world, we are finding that there are more corporations who are reaching out to us and are either interested to learn more, might be interested in funding it, might be just interested in understanding what their options are, because some of them are fairly new to this. But NCC is still going to be here in hundreds of years, and we're just happy to engage and talk to people about what we're doing and why it matters. So I think there is increased opportunity for corporate partnerships for sure. But I'll also say, if anyone here happens to work for a big corporation who has lots of money, you should let us know, because we can always use some more.
I was just going to mention as well on the corporate partners note that Jill mentioned, we are looking into carbon markets, which would mean generating carbon credits from the property, really in the exploratory phases. But it seems that carbon projects line up really well with conservation projects, because they're all about keeping trees on the land permanently. So we think that through the sale of carbon projects, and many of you are probably familiar, we have a large carbon project NCC does out in BC called the Darkwoods Project, which you can read about online if you're not familiar with it. It has attracted interesting corporate partners to the table, with the people who are showing up to buy those credits. Maybe then there's also additional conversation about philanthropy happening too, and figuring out all sorts of different ways we can work with companies. And it might be that they have unique technology we could partner up to try to take advantage of. I think there's a lot we could learn from each other. And it's really wonderful to see more and more corporations waking up to the twin crises, wanting to get involved, wanting to do the right thing, do better. And we're here, and like Jill said, happy to absorb it however it may show up.
Yeah, as one of the things we did at the beginning was did a shout out to OPG, who is helping to support our LIC program, but has also supported us through their regional biodiversity program for restorations for the last 6 years. So we have some long-standing corporate partnerships. When we look at the carbon side, I think one of the questions I often get in the carbon side is just sort of our mechanisms and how we go about it. And one thing I think is really important to let everybody from NCC know, people who are supporters, is that we do have a very clear policy that we work with organizations or corporations that are already doing things to try and mitigate their footprint. So, you know, making sure that we're not involved in greenwashing is obviously really important to NCC, and that is just built into the way we approach projects like the carbon offset project or most of our projects in general.
Great, we have a couple more questions here. So Doug says, thank you to Land Escapes. Are there any other similar conservation-minded businesses that are willing to donate large land holdings or for other large landscape projects?
Great question, Doug. And if you know any, again, please let us know. But no, I mean, when I started in the large landscape program director role, I said right off the bat, we're going to need different kinds of landowners here. There are so many wonderful landowners who've donated so much land to NCC over the years at those smaller scales. But a lot of the times with the large pieces, they're often owned by large corporations who might not have conservation towards the front of their minds as much as we were lucky to find with Land Escapes. And I think that's what it takes. It takes a bit of a different mindset in that corporation. So that will be one of the things that I'll continue to be seeking out, not just where those large land holdings are in Ontario, but where are the corporate partners who may be inspired to do something good. And even if it's not a full donation of land, maybe it's a partial donation of land. Maybe it's enough to enable us to kind of see our way over that big fundraising hurdle and try to make it happen. So I'm seeing a lot of promise in that area. We're kind of in early conversations with other large corporations with large land holdings who are open to donating at least a portion of it. And I think there's a lot of goodwill to be generated from that. I want to obviously be very careful that we're staying away from anything that could be construed as greenwashing, because what we really want is a company that's just making good conservation happen, and that's the top priority.
And we have another question from Margaret. Are there any major obstacles to success that you foresee?
Well, Margaret knows me and knows I'm a bit of I call myself a pathological optimist. I kind of just always think things are going to turn out okay. And I don't always think that's a good thing. But honestly, Margaret, I am seeing our paths forward on a few of the large landscape projects we're working on. And they're really clear. And I think it's because we're trying to take a really thoughtful approach to these. We're making sure that we're slowing down and taking the time to engage with local Indigenous communities, that we're getting to know the neighbors and thinking about how this property fits into that larger landscape, that we're making robust fundraising plans, A, B, C, and D, just to make sure we're sort of backing ourselves up as well as we can. We're thinking about stewardship, how to resource these, the appropriate stewardship models and staffing that would be needed and the funding to support that. So overall, I'm feeling pretty excited because in addition to fee simple acquisition, which means just the direct acquisition of private land, whether through donation or purchase, NCC has a lot of other tools in the toolbox we can explore in the large landscape program. We can do large scale conservation easements. We can look at other effective conservation measures. Those are called OECMs, and that's a very new tool that helps acknowledge lands that are acting as conservation but may not have formal designations on them. There's IPCAs, that's Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas. NCC is really open to and excited about supporting Indigenous-led conservation. So overall, across the program, I feel like there's a lot of tools that we can draw from depending on what happens with markets and do we find those corporate donors, and however it goes. I, again, can see lots of paths to success, and I have no doubt there'll be lots of learnings along the way. And I always think the best way to learn is by going, oh, I didn't see that one coming. We'll try it again a different way next time.
All right, I see one more question here, and it's, will the large landscapes program be self-supporting, i.e. existing projects will not suffer in any way?
So, and I think that's Doug. Hi, Doug. So, I mean, the large landscape program, one, we have dedicated fundraiser focused on that. Two, we're actually raising funds to support the program, AKA the staff directly. And then 3, we're raising the fund for the actual projects. The projects themselves have significant SEF, or Stewardship Endowment Fund, into the millions and millions of dollars, because we recognize that taking care of these projects is a long-term goal that we need to be making sure that we're not sort of, what's the saying, stealing from Peter to pay Paul. So we're making sure that we're resourcing these so that they won't be sort of pulling from the organization in general. In terms of the next couple of years, as we do both large landscapes and smaller projects, both are absolutely moving forward. We are, as an organization, shifting to try and look a little bit harder for land donations to try and make sure that the funds we've got spread a little further, but there also is some increasing funds coming in from some government entities and some others who are interested in moving this forward more quickly. So I think all of those things coming together mean that we're going to be doing both. And, you know, the projects come when the projects come. So you might see lulls in either one of them every once in a while. But no, we will continue to focus on the other areas we've been working on for decades and continue to make sure we're protecting more land and taking care of it forever.
Great. All right. I see a question from Steve's daughter, Mila. She is very interested to know what other animals live in this area other than those already mentioned.
Oh, Mila, you are going to regret asking me. I'm going to go on all night and everyone's going to be like, I want to get out of here. So, I mean, like I mentioned, I had a lot of fun birding. So I saw lots of really big, cool birds like great blue heron. I saw lots of beautiful birds like the male scarlet tanager with that striking red. I saw a log full of painted turtles. I scared, or they scared me, a number of garter snakes as they crossed my path. And I think what really stands out for me was the butterflies and dragonflies, because like I said, I spent a lot of time around water. So the dragonflies would just be sort of zipping past me as I was eating my lunch, massive dragonflies, and just butterflies, every species of butterfly I know how to identify, and a whole bunch I didn't know how. You would find them just coating milkweed flower in that sort of June heat. And I don't think there's a nicer sight than that. So yeah, a lot of really cool stuff happening out there. And if you ever want to go out and do a bit of a survey, that would be most welcome, because I bet there's a ton more that we don't even know about.
May I, Kristen, jump in?
Please.
So I'm Ben, the current owner, I guess, or whatever, donating the land. So just to answer the question about animals out there, it is absolutely insane. Not only how many animals we see, like I was out for a hike last week and I saw 2 moose just wandering along through the forest. But it's also incredible how they clearly don't really know that humans, like I had a raccoon kind of walk through my campsite first thing in the morning and just not even realize that humans kind of exist, like just toddling along, like, you know, this is nature and this is my territory. But I mean, you know, especially in the spring, I saw probably 10 Blandings turtles just kind of crossing the road to lay eggs, and, you know, saw them on logs. Tons of turtle nests all over the place. Like you guys said, the trail cams are picking up every kind of possible animal out there. Just, it's absolutely amazing. The butterfly, you know, living kind of closer to civilization, the difference in volume of butterflies and other bugs out there, it's just kind of crazy. So it's, as far as seeing all of these really amazing animals way out in the backcountry, it's a completely different experience. It's absolutely different. The deer kind of almost attack you because, you know, you're in their territory. Like, nobody knows that humans exist, and it's wonderful. So it's pretty cool.
Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate the color commentary for someone who spent just about as much or more time out on that landscape as me. And you reminded me, I saw a snapping turtle too. And it was one of the most stubborn snapping turtles, one of those really big, angry females. So I was trying to help it move off the road just in case anybody else was coming by, and it wanted nothing to do with me. And I kept trying to explain I was trying to help it. But yeah, it's a wildlife mecca out there.
And if we wanted to embarrass Kristen, Mila, if you and your dad go online and look, you can find videos of Kristen showing you how to help turtles cross the road. It's pretty adorable.
Amazing. All right, so I think that's all of the questions, actually. I'm just gonna bring up that last slide again that has my email address. So I think that's it. That's all. I just have a couple of reminders before we close off tonight. So I just want to thank everyone again for taking the time to join us for this event tonight. I will be sending out a follow-up email once the recording to this event is available. I'll also share a couple more resources related to some of the stuff that we discussed during the Q&A. I just also want to mention that our next Leaders in Conservation event is happening in January, on January 27th. And in that event, we'll be sharing an update on the wetland restoration project we have happening on Peely Island. So similar to tonight, you'll also have an opportunity to ask questions and for a bit of a discussion and ask your questions to our science staff directly. So if you're interested in joining, if you haven't already reached out, please do reach out to me and I'll make sure you get registered for that. If you're interested in learning more, you have more questions, or if you're interested in supporting this project, again, you can reach out to me as well, and I would be happy to help with that. If you are interested in getting email updates, you can also do that on our website. That's natureconservancy.ca, and you can sign up for email. You'll get the latest updates on conservation events and all that sort of stuff. And with that, that's it. That's all. Thanks so much again, and have a great night.